Imagine trying to fix like a really broken, complex machine by just explicitly deciding to do absolutely nothing. Like you don't grab a wrench, you don't consult the manual. In fact, you basically throw away your tools, step back, and categorically refuse to try any harder.
Right, which goes against literally everything we're taught.
Exactly. I mean, in our modern kind of hustle-obsessed culture where you track every micro habit and, optimize every waking second, that sounds like a recipe for total failure. It just sounds completely irresponsible.
Oh, absolutely.
But according to this highly specific mystical spiritual text we are looking at today, stopping your own frantic effort isn't a sign of failure at all. It's actually the prerequisite, like the absolute only way to achieve profound, lasting transformation.
Yeah, it's a complete inversion of how we're taught to operate in the world, honestly. We are so conditioned to believe that output requires our direct input. Like if you want a better life, you have to engineer it through just sheer willpower.
Right. Grit and grind.
Exactly. But the framework we are exploring today, it bypasses the mechanics of human effort entirely, and it just enters this completely different atmospheric layer of spiritual reality.
So welcome in, everyone. Whether you are navigating heavy, complex projects at work, or maybe you're grinding your way through a difficult degree, or honestly just trying to survive daily frustrations without losing your mind, this deep dive is going to offer you a massive paradigm shift.
It really is.
Our mission today, as the learner, is to unpack this fascinating spiritual letter. It's addressed to a man named John, and the core of the letter analyzes the real-life, pretty dramatic transformation of a student named Abraham Aguilar. And this is key, the author doesn't evaluate Abraham using like modern psychology or behavioral science.
No, not all.
Instead, the analysis relies on the mystical theology found in a text called The Book of Heaven by Louisa Picaretta. Okay, let's unpack this because
Well, the reliance on the Book of Heaven is really what gives this letter its gravity. That text is entirely devoted to defining what it means to live in the divine will. So the author is trying to show John that Abraham's story isn't just a standard self-help narrative.
right.
Abraham didn't just grit his teeth and white-knuckle his way into becoming a better person. He experienced an existential shift in how his soul actually operated.
We're talking about moving from operating out of your own isolated human will to operating entirely within the divine will. It is a radical, totally countercultural perspective on how to achieve impact.
Yeah.
You don't push harder, you just let go completely. But to really understand the mechanics of how this works, we have to start where Abraham started. And according to the source, his starting line was years of deep, entrenched rebellion.
Yeah, the letter paints a very clear picture of Abraham during this rebellious phase. It says he was living entirely in his human will. And in the context of this specific mystical theology, the human will isn't just a neutral decision-making tool.
Okay, so what is it then?
When it operates on its own, it is described as a force that constantly wants to assert itself. It desires sovereignty. It separates itself from God. And because it is finite and flawed, it ultimately creates profound fractures in a person's life.
I was actually trying to visualize what that feels like on a daily basis, and operating purely in the human will, it basically seems like stubbornly trying to force a mismatched puzzle piece into place using like a heavy hammer.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
You're sweating, you're pounding away at the cardboard, and it feels like you're doing something incredibly productive because you are exerting so much physical and mental energy. But in reality, you're just damaging the picture, you're breaking the piece, and you're completely exhausting yourself.
And you're distorting the reality of the situation to fit your own rigid demands. That exhausting effort leads to what the text brilliantly calls a thorny ego.
A thorny ego, I love that phrasing.
Right. When we rely entirely on our own strength, we become defensive. We put up thorns to protect our fragile efforts. We become prickly to everyone around us because we're just constantly defending our territory. And what is so compelling about this letter is how it reframes the process of breaking down that thorny ego.
Right, because usually we look at someone in a rebellious, thorny phase and think they just need a wake-up call or maybe a harsh consequence to snap them out of it. Like they just need to try harder to be good.
But the author points to a very subtle detail in Abraham's story. It mentions that during his rebellious years, Abraham actually started attending church, but he was highly reluctant. He did not want to be there.
He was being dragged there, basically.
Exactly. His human will was still putting up massive resistance.
Mm.
Now, in a conventional narrative, a reluctant attendee is failing. They aren't trying hard enough. But the source explicitly says this reluctance wasn't a failure at all.
Really?
Yeah. What's fascinating here is that it was the precise moment the dissolution of his human will began.
But how does that work, though? If he's sitting there with his arms crossed, hating every minute of it, how is anything dissolving? It just sounds like he's still full of thorns.
Well, it comes down to the mechanics of grace in the Book of Heaven. God does not force his way in with a bigger hammer. He waits. The theology insists that the divine will requires the human soul to willingly create a space for it.
Right.
So even though Abraham was reluctant, the physical act of showing up was a micro-surrender. It was a tiny crack in the armor of his thorny ego. God was just patiently waiting for Abraham to simply stop hammering for 5 minutes.
Wow.
Yeah, the transformation wasn't the result of intense human effort finally finding the right answer. It was a result of Abraham letting exhaustion take over, allowing the divine will to slowly break down those thorns.
Okay, so the human will has to exhaust itself before the divine will can truly enter. But wait, hold on. I have to push back here because my modern hyper-independent brain is just screaming red flags right now.
I get that.
If the goal is to completely abandon your own will, don't you just become a passive robot? Like, if God is doing everything, am I just supposed to sit on the couch and wait for the divine will to physically move my limbs? Because that just sounds like you are completely giving up your agency and doing nothing.
Yeah, it is the most common critique of mystical surrender, and it is a complete misunderstanding of the theology. The framework clarifies that giving up the human will is absolutely not about becoming an automaton. The core operative concept in this text is fusion.
Fusion, like two separate elements combining to create a single new reaction.
Precisely. Let's step away from the puzzle analogy for a moment. Think about a person trying to cross an ocean in a massive boat. Operating in the human will is like trying to cross that ocean by rowing with a tiny wooden oar.
Okay, yeah, that sounds terrible.
You're sweating, you're miserable, your hands are bleeding, and you're barely moving. Now, becoming a passive robot would mean throwing the oar into the water, lying down on the deck, and just starving to death while you wait for a magical current to teleport you.
Okay, so if it's not rowing and it's not starving on the deck, what is fusion then?
Fusion is standing up and raising a sail.
Oh, wow.
Right. You still have to navigate. You still have to tie the ropes, read the weather, and act with profound intentionality. You are highly active. But the propulsion, the actual source of the energy moving the massive vessel forward, comes from an entirely different, infinitely more powerful source. You aren't generating the power to cross the ocean anymore. You're capturing the wind.
Man, that completely shifts the perspective. The vessel is still moving, the sailor is still working, but the exhaustion is gone because the friction of generating the power is gone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when Abraham reached his turning point at a discipleship training program, the text describes it beautifully as the moment grace touched the soul.
Here's where it gets really interesting because
Yeah, that wasn't a lightning bolt that turned him into a zombie. It was the moment he finally dropped the oar and raised the sail. He dedicated his life to Jesus, which in this framework meant he allowed Jesus to perform every action through his own faculties. It is an intimate, continuous collaboration.
And the immediate proof that he didn't become a passive robot on a couch is exactly what happens next in the narrative. Because raising that sail naturally forces incredible forward momentum. Like, Abraham gets incredibly active. He begins boldly sharing his faith with his teachers, with his friends. He actually forms a Bible study group.
Yeah, he gets busy.
Right. He is out there making significant waves in his high school environment.
But the author of the letter is very careful to issue a warning here. We cannot misunderstand what this Bible study group actually was. If we connect this to the bigger picture and look at it through a secular, modern lens, we might just call it a social apostolate.
Like a community building exercise or, a high school volunteer club. Someone doing a good deed because it checks a box on their college application or satisfies some kind of moral urge.
Exactly, which would just be the human will finding a new, slightly more respectable way to assert itself. But the source insists that because Abraham's soul was truly fused with the divine will, he wasn't just doing good deeds, he became a literal flow of God's love. The text specifically notes that every word and action of Abraham now carried the power of God.
That is a staggering claim. Every word and action carrying divine power.
It really is. And it explains the underlying mechanism of why his transformation had such a massive, undeniable impact on the people around him. It wasn't Abraham's newfound charisma. It wasn't that he suddenly learned how to craft brilliant, persuasive arguments to debate his teachers.
Right.
It was the divine will operating through his human faculties. When someone operates in fusion, The friction of their ego disappears.
Which perfectly aligns with the teachings of Luisa Picareta in the Book of Heaven. The text says that when a person lets the divine do everything within them, they become a true light to the surrounding world. They radiate.
Yes, exactly.
And honestly, you can't fake that radiation. Think about the people you interact with daily. You can instantly tell when someone is white-knuckling their way through a presentation or trying to manipulate a conversation to get what they want. It feels heavy. It feels prickly.
Because you are feeling their thorny ego
Yeah.
trying to hook into yours. It is exhausting to be around.
Totally.
Contrast that with encountering someone who is in a state of true surrender, someone who is simply shining a light. They aren't trying to force you into anything. They are magnetic because they are operating with the effortless power of the wind rather than the frantic splashing of the oar.
So if you are listening to this right now, you might be thinking, okay, sure, Abraham was a high school student forming a Bible study, but I'm managing a supply chain crisis, or I'm trying to finish the dissertation, or I'm trying to build a business. How does this mystical theology actually apply to my deeply stressful adult responsibilities?
Right, the real-world application.
Exactly. And to answer that, we have to look at how the author of the letter applies Abraham's breakthrough to the actual recipient of the document, John.
John's situation is vital because he grounds this soaring theology in the reality of knowledge work and heavy responsibilities. John isn't in high school. He is dedicating immense personal effort to translating precious, complex manuscripts, building a community. He's managing content and communications. He is carrying a really heavy load.
He is basically every professional, creator, or student listening to this deep dive right now.
And John is dealing with the exact same internal war. He's mixing his own intense, well-meaning personal effort with moments of crushing exhaustion where he realizes his human willpower just isn't enough to get the job done.
So the author actually gives John 3 very specific directives on how to take the theology of the Book of Heaven and operationalize it in his daily life. And these directives are essentially a masterclass in how to live this out no matter what your job is.
Oh, absolutely.
The first directive is a complete reframing of frustration.
Yeah, the text advises John to treat every single daily difficulty not as an annoyance, but as a direct opportunity to strip off the human will.
Think about the existential weight of that shift. Let's say you're having a catastrophic day. Your alarm didn't go off, you spilled coffee on your laptop, and you just got an incredibly passive-aggressive email from a client.
We've all been there.
Right. And the human will immediately flares up. The thorns come out. You want to fire back an angry email. You want to curse the universe. You want to reassert your dominance over your ruined day.
Yep.
But this framework says freeze. That frustration isn't just bad luck. It is a specific, targeted invitation. It is an opportunity to recognize the limits of your own oar. You are being invited to say, I am taking off my human will right now. I am stepping away from the keyboard, and I am inviting the divine will to author my reaction.
Which requires immense humility, honestly. And it leads perfectly into the second directive. The author gives John a very specific intention to use. When John sits down to do his incredibly difficult work, specifically when he sits down to translate dense manuscripts, he is told to pause and use this intention. Lord, please use my hands, my mind. Please do this work in me so everything becomes a praise to you.
It's the verbal act of raising the sail. Before you open your laptop, before you walk into the boardroom for a difficult negotiation, or before you start studying for the bar exam, you actively declare that you are not going to rely on your own strength. You are offering your physical and mental faculties, your hands, your mind, your vocabulary as tools for the divine will to use.
And it creates a protective barrier against the thorny ego.
Yeah.
Because if you genuinely invite the divine will to do the work in you, you cannot simultaneously be desperate to take the credit for it.
Right.
Which brings us to the third and, frankly, the most disruptive directive in the entire letter.
Oh, this one is huge.
The text explicitly tells John to stop looking at external results.
It literally tells him to completely ignore how many subscribers he has, or how many people are listening to his content, or what his output metrics look like.
Yep.
But okay, if you're offering your mind and hands as tools, as we just discussed, that creates a massive problem for how we measure success in the modern world. You cannot track surrender on a KPI dashboard. You can't put fusion on a quarterly earnings report.
No, you definitely can't.
So what does this all mean? How does John actually know he's succeeding if he throws away all the metrics?
Well, the author tells John that the only metric that possesses any reality is the internal disposition. Success is defined entirely as the intimate, second-by-second union of your will with God's will in the present moment. Nothing else exists.
Second by second union. That completely shatters the illusion of the spreadsheets and the productivity hacks.
Oh, because it redefines the very nature of action. If your only goal is union with the divine will, you can achieve 100% success while translating a document in a dark room that no human being ever reads.
Wow.
If you did it with your hands and mind fully surrendered to the wind, it was a perfect eternal action. Conversely, you could gain 1 million subscribers, launch a massively successful startup, and win every award in your industry. But if you did it entirely out of your thorny, assertive, isolated human will, the text would suggest that your effort is spiritually fractured and ultimately hollow.
It just takes the pressure off the outcome entirely. You're no longer responsible for saving the world or even saving your own project. You are only responsible for the process of surrender. The ultimate conclusion of the source lays this out with just a beautiful piece of imagery.
Yeah.
It says that whether you are a young student in a noisy high school forming a Bible study like Abraham, or an adult quietly translating manuscripts in a room alone like John, the core instruction is exactly the same. Let God be God in yourself.
Let God be God in yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, it is the ultimate antidote to the exhaustion of modern life.
And the letter says that if you simply do that, your life transforms into a poem of the divine will. A poem. Not a spreadsheet, not a task list, not a strategic 5-year plan. A poem. It's this flowing, artistic expression that naturally and powerfully radiates light to everyone around it.
It just ties everything together. You move from the rigid, exhausting mechanics of the human will rowing in the dark, basically to the sweeping, effortless momentum of the divine will.
So let's look back at this incredible journey we've just taken through this letter. We started with the anatomy of rebellion, that isolated, thorny ego operating on its own exhausted strength, hammering away at a puzzle that won't fit.
Right.
We saw how reluctance isn't failure, but the cracking of the armor. Then we explored the spark of discipleship, where grace touches the soul. We dismantled the fear of becoming a passive robot and discovered the breathtaking concept of fusion, dropping the oar and raising the sail. And finally, we saw the ripple effect. A soul becoming an effortless flow of light and action, completely discarding worldly metrics in favor of a second-by-second internal union with the divine.
You know, we've spent this entire time talking about how this mystical theology impacts your own internal peace, your daily frustrations, and the immediate circle of people around you. But if we pull the camera all the way back, it introduces a paradigm that challenges how we view history itself.
How do you mean, like on a global scale?
Yeah. If the divine will operates most perfectly through absolute surrender, what does that mean for systemic, massive global change? We are constantly trying to solve the world's most terrifying crises: war, poverty, division. Using the collective human will, we form committees, we draft treaties, we try to force the puzzle pieces together with massive geopolitical hammers.
Right.
But if history is truly greatest, most lasting transformations didn't come from sheer human willpower, but from individuals operating as pure conduits for the divine. Well, maybe the way we are trying to save the world is fundamentally backward.
That is a staggering thought to take with you. The next time you're reading the news and feeling completely overwhelmed by the state of the world, or the next time you face a seemingly impossible obstacle in your own life, ask yourself, are we just building bigger oars to fight the ocean? Or is it finally time to drop the tools, step back, and raise the sail? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.